We go now to the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff. He joins us from Boynton Beach, Florida this morning. Good morning to you, Congressman. The president personally attacked you yesterday at a conservative political action summit, and he balked at specifically the broadening of the investigation into his finances. Can you clarify exactly what Democrats are looking for here? Is it his tax returns?
Well, I'm not surprised the president has balked at Congress looking into his personal business, something he's tried to draw a red line around. But we have seen from our own investigation, as well as the special counsel's, just how perilous it would be for the country if we ignored or allowed him to draw red lines. The Moscow-Trump Tower deal, for example, is among the most disturbing, because that's something the president was pursuing throughout the midst of the presidential campaign, while saying he was having no business dealings with the Russians. That was a deal that stood to make him more money than any other deal in his life. And it was a deal where he was pursuing help from the Kremlin, from Putin himself, at a time when Putin was seeking relief from sanctions. And that is the most compromising circumstance that I can imagine. So we are certainly looking deep into the set of issues around Moscow-Trump Tower. We're also looking at persistent allegations that the Russians have been laundering money through the Trump Organization. I don't know that that's true, but if it is, again, it's a profound compromise of this president.
You said you don't know that that's true. Who can answer that question for you? Who do you need to talk to?
Well, we'll need to talk to some of the banks that have been doing business with Mr. Trump, like Deutsche Bank, which has had a history of laundering Russian money. It was a bank, one of the very few, if only, that would do business with Mr. Trump after American banks refused. But we also will want to speak with the accountants, the chief financial officers for the Trump Organization, and others who would have information about the Moscow-Trump Tower deal, about the issue of money laundering. In fact, we're bringing Felix Sater in to talk about Moscow-Trump Tower in a couple weeks. So there are any number of witnesses that can shed light on whether America's national security is compromised because the president has been pursuing financial interests with the Russians.
Well, Michael Cohen, I know, will be testifying again before your committee this week. What kind of corroborating materials do you expect him to bring to that meeting?
Well, Mr. Cohen testified in open session, and I can't go into our closed session interview, but about his false testimony before our committee previously, and how that written statement had gone through different drafts or iterations. He testified in open session that others had reviewed that testimony, and we have obviously a deep and compelling interest in whether others were knowing of those false statements that he would make to Congress. Whether there are any other acts or evidence of obstruction of justice, which is also a core part of our investigation.
Cohen said, though, in that open testimony, he had no direct evidence of collusion with Russia. The Senate Intel chairman also said, at this point, no evidence of collusion at this point. Have you seen, do you have direct evidence of collusion with Russia?
Well, I think there is direct evidence in the emails from the Russians through their intermediary, offering dirt on Hillary Clinton as part of what is described in writing as the Russian government effort to help elect Donald Trump. They offer that dirt. There is an acceptance of that offer in writing from the president's son, Don Jr., and there's overt acts in furtherance of that. That is the meeting at Trump Tower and all the lies to cover up that meeting at Trump Tower, and apparently lies that the president participated in. That, to me, is direct evidence, but there's also abundant circumstantial evidence. There is, for example, evidence of Manafort sharing internal polling data with someone linked to the Russian intelligence services. But why do that? What legitimate purpose is there for things like that? Michael Cohen's own testimony was circumstantial evidence that the president was dealing with Roger Stone, who was dealing with WikiLeaks in an effort to find out about releases of information.
Impeachment grounds for you still. I mean, these are serious allegations.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, and I've made this distinction all along, and that is, while there's abundant evidence of collusion, the issue from a criminal point of view is whether there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt of a criminal conspiracy. And that is something that we will have to await Bob Mueller's report and the underlying evidence to determine. We will also have to look at the whole body of improper and criminal actions by the president, including those campaign finance crimes, to determine whether they rise to the level of removal from office. I have said that I think we should await the evidence from Bob Mueller as well as our own work. And I'm pleased to see that Mr. Nunes, he and I have profound disagreements about many things, are in agreement on one thing: the report and the evidence needs to be provided to Congress. I think that also needs to be made public.
Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader, has called for your recusal, saying that because you had contact with Michael Cohen, that you should not be directly involved in these investigations any longer, and that you set that standard. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's pretty frivolous. What McCarthy is upset about is that I invited Michael Cohen to testify and that he accepted, and our staff sat down and interviewed him before his testimony. That's what you do in any credible investigation. Bob Mueller's team sat down with Michael Cohen 7 times. The extent of my contact was just inviting him to testify and also trying to allay his concerns about the president's threats against him and his family. But our staff certainly sat down to interview him, and that's what you do in any credible investigation. Mr. McCarthy, I think, can be forgiven for not knowing how to run a credible investigation. For the last 2 years, they did none. But one thing that I think is really unforgivable, and that's the degree to which Mr. McCarthy and others have prostrate themselves before this president, and not just in the Russia investigation, but even more significantly now with this emergency declaration, which is an attack on the Congress's power of the purse. And for Kevin McCarthy as the Republican leader to go along with that, to so debase himself before this president at the cost of our institution, I think is unforgivable.
Thank you very much, Congressman.
Joining us with a reaction is the House Minority Leader, Congressman Kevin McCarthy, California. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you for being with us. Let's start with Adam Schiff, because you believe that he's met his own standard as it relates to recusal in the investigation, which apparently the Mueller investigation is not going the way he wants.
Well, there's a lot of questions, and Schiff actually laid out a couple years ago that anybody that shows that a conflict of interest or disbelief in it has to recuse themselves. There's a couple questions for him. Schiff, when we were trying to find out who paid for this dossier, he fought. So we could not find out it was the Democratic Party that paid the Russians for the dossier. Then now we find out that Schiff met with Glenn Simpson, who's the co-founder of Fusion GPS. Well, who, remember, Nellie Orr worked, the wife of Orr, over at the Justice Department. And at the time he met with him, the committee wanted to re-look at him based upon the testimony Glenn Simpson had given. So did Schiff talk to Simpson about that, what the committee wanted to look at? Now we find out in the Michael Cohen that Schiff talked to him. We want to know, did staff meet with him? Did he tamper with the witness? Did he try to direct the witness? How many times did he meet?
Well,
what did they talk
say
about?
That they talked about what issues would come up, the topics?
Schiff has not said so. These are questions he needs to answer. The other thing that's very interesting, when Glenn Simpson came before the committee, you know what Adam Schiff did at the end? He asked Glenn Simpson to direct the committee on where they should go with the investigation. The man who created all this. Then the most outrageous thing I found in that whole Michael Cohen hearing. Remember why this whole Mueller investigation is going forward. This whole thing of collusion. It is all based upon the belief that Michael Cohen went to Prague to meet with the Russians. Michael Cohen said he did not. So the foundation for why we are even in the investigation in the first place has been thrown apart.
What did you think, Congressman, what did you think of the tape I just played? Now, in that tape, Adam Schiff believed he was talking to a Russian operative who had compromising material on Donald Trump. It sounded to me an awful lot like, on tape, him colluding with the Russians to dig up dirt on Donald Trump. Maybe I heard it wrong, but that's what I heard. I'm wondering what you heard.
Well, remember what else we know about Adam Schiff. Before this investigation even began, he said he had proof and evidence. Now, I'm not related to Joe McCarthy, but Adam Schiff is a modern-day Joe McCarthy, somebody who claims something and never has delivered. But the one thing he has delivered on, protecting Fusion GPS. He didn't want us to know that the Democrats paid for the Russians to have this false dossier. He protected Glenn and met with him when others did not know. And did he tell him that the committee was concerned about his own testimony?
They're going to use up to eight House committees now. Nonstop investigation. This is the widest net investigation we've ever seen. You're right. This is like modern day McCarthyism. And they're doing it to get their power back in the hopes that we can eliminate gas, oil, cows, planes, cars as we know them, and everything is going to be free and confiscate pretty much everything everybody makes. I've never seen it like this before. I don't know what the right strategy is, but if this is an abuse of their power, it should be.
They're doing it for a couple different reasons. If you watched Congressman Nadler this weekend, I was on George Stephanopoulos' show with him right afterwards. He is starting to denounce the Mueller investigation. Why? Because they know there's no collusion. So they're saying, we don't have to worry about that. We need to start our own, and just throwing mud anywhere they go. But we've got to stop calling them the Democratic Party, because I've never seen it this poisonous, this toxic, and there's no other way to say it than a socialist. They want to take over your health care. They just introduced Medicare for all, where you can't have private health insurance. They want to take over your homes and what you can even have in your homes or your planes by this new Green Deal. They even call themselves the Democratic Socialist Party. We need to call them for exactly what this is. And they want to hide from the fact of the success of this president. Just last week, look what the GDP said, 2.6% growth when everybody thought it was 2.2%. This president is sitting in Vietnam trying to denuclearize North Korea, and never in the history of this country, it always was before, that the politics ends at the water's edge. If this president or any president is overseas, you would not do to this president what they did. The dislike for this president is so great, they'll go against their own country's safety and freedom.
If he would have given $150 billion in cash and other currencies, they probably would have praised him, just like they praised that Iranian deal. Mr. Minority Leader, Congressman McCarthy, thank you.